everybody, what's going on? Caden Cleveland again here with the Oklahoma Senate. You're joining us for another episode of OK Senate on Deck, of course, with our President Pro Tem, Senator Greg Treat, and special guest, Senator Julie Daniels, the Judiciary Chair here in the Senate. So, Senator Daniels, welcome to the On Deck podcast.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. And Pro Tem, thank you again for joining us. Of course.
Yeah, I thought you were going to leave me out of the welcome.
No, of course not. Yeah. Never leave you out. Of course. And just in case you're watching, we did promise last week that Pro Tem would be the one introducing this week, but we're actually going to move that to next week. So just in case you were concerned. Yes, absolutely. Well, just to dive right in real quick, Senator Daniels, yes. You are the Judiciary Chair here in the Senate. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about what that's like and I guess being the chair of the Judiciary Committee and some of the bills that you've gone through this year?
Well, this year it was a big job because there were so many bills.
Yes.
So many bills related to criminal justice reform. Like other committees, many bills that didn't quite make it past the finish line last year because we may have adjourned a little early.
Yeah.
And so we were revisiting some of those and, deciding, since you can't hear them all, which ones are most appropriate to hear, which ones maybe could wait later, or maybe some should just go away.
Gotcha.
We adjourned after 18 months of session, but it was early for last session.
Yeah.
But Caden, if I can for a second back up, over the interim, I had a really important decision of who would be the next Judiciary Chair. It's an extremely important role. When I became a senator, we passed a lot of tort reform, workers' comp reform that was monumental.
Right.
And ever since that time, there's been an attempt to erode part of it. And then there's an ongoing attempt to make sure that we continually improve it, where there's gaps, where there's things that need to be modernized. But there's a real, fear is the wrong word, but concern of mine that if I didn't put somebody extremely strong with the knowledge of the law that could push back on forces to erode the progress we've made, that all the progress under Pro Tem Bingman, Pro Tem Coffey, Pro Tem Schultz could be eroded in a session or two.
Right.
And so it wasn't a hard choice to pick Senator Daniels, but she's done a fabulous job this year under an intense amount of pressure to go the opposite way. Reform is really hard, and then it takes a while to get the results you want to see. We've seen amazing results from our workers' comp reform, from our tort reform.
Right.
But obviously there's people whose paycheck depends on trying to go the opposite direction. Yeah. And so there was a clear choice. No offense to other senators that may have been interested in it, but I went to her over the interim and asked her to do it, and she's taken it very seriously. So I just want to make sure I got that in there.
Yes, absolutely.
She's brand new at it, but she's doing an excellent job.
Love that. Absolutely. Senator Daniels,
I'd like to say, of course, I appreciate the opportunity to do this, but I find myself philosophically aligned with the Pro Tem.
Right.
I've admired his stand on issues for a number of years, and these were issues that as a generalist, just as a citizen, I was interested in, so I certainly don't want to turn the clock back. We worked far too hard after one party was in charge of our government for the first 100 years of statehood.
Right.
It takes time to try to modernize, reform, and undo maybe some things that were doing more harm than good on behalf of the citizens of Oklahoma. So I want to push through and see workers' comp reform through to the end. I'm disappointed right now that we're going to have to refight some battles on lawsuit reform, but we're going to do that. So I'm just up for the challenge, and I enjoy the work.
So that's been kind of a conversation lately. You mentioned the few unexpected decisions made on the Supreme Court side of thing with lawsuit reform.
They were expected.
They were expected. Okay. I was trying to be nice. But can you guys kind of walk me through, because I really have a limited knowledge on this topic here. If you don't mind kind of giving the background and what exactly I guess the next move is forward, that'd be awesome.
Well, just one thing in terms of the people who made the decision, the justice who made the decision, you didn't have a full court, and you had one recusal, and you had a couple of special judges. So you didn't have the full 9 justices of the Supreme Court appointed by the governor of the state of Oklahoma making a critical decision about a large body of reform law that the elected representatives and senators of the people put in place. So, in my view, there was a little bit of legislating from the bench, and that's, there's a fine line there between interpreting legislative intent and literally undoing and rewriting the legislation from the bench.
Well, when the other party was in charge, an actual pro tem, a predecessor of mine, sent out a letter to trial lawyers in Texas and other states saying, come to Oklahoma. you'll get much more favorable awards. And the tort system is not reformed like you have in Texas.
Right.
Tort reform is a very complicated, it's lawsuit reform. So runaway juries, jackpot justice, you'll hear people say those type of terms. So we put a lot of work and effort into it when Republicans first took over. We made huge reforms on it. This case that we're talking about here, alluding to, this was a very serious issue. A man was injured for his lifetime. I mean, severely injured. So I don't want to gloss over that fact. And he needed some compensation for real losses. And then the part that was at play here was called non-economic damages. So non-economic damages is a pretty amorphous topic. You can say, emotional. You can say all these. You can go through the whole thing. She's probably better explaining what non-economic damages are. But part of our reform was capping non-economic damages. But we couldn't cap non-economic damages on people who had been killed, and a claim was made. Nor did we want to. Right. But Oklahoma's Constitution is very clear. You cannot cap awards when the victim is deceased. Mm-hmm. This victim lived, although maimed for life from very serious injuries. And the issue at stake before the court was, could we cap non-economic damages on a living victim? And the court found that it was a special law because we treated living victims different than we did deceased victims of some injury, which is asinine because the very court that's supposed to uphold the Constitution of the state of Oklahoma ignored the fact that we had to comply with the Oklahoma State Constitution and not limiting awards to deceased victims. But this is a pattern, and the reason I kind of flippantly said it was expected, Senator Daniels made a very good point about the temporary justices on there, the not being all the way up to the full 9. Mm-hmm. But we have seen a pattern in Oklahoma with our Supreme Court of legislating from the bench and using 2 provisions of the Constitution, special law, which they used here, single subject. And single subject law. And we've seen time and time again when they don't agree with a policy decision, they hide behind those 2 provisions. Right. And so, sorry, Senator Daniels, I know
No, that's fine. That is a very good explanation. And, of course, the goal with any reform is to make sure that the victim or the injured worker or the family are compensated. Right. And we tend to lose sight of all the economic damages that are awarded, the millions and millions, taking into account, loss of wages, ongoing, the injury, the ongoing medical expenses of treating injury. Right. What if the injury then causes another ailment further on? If it's connected, we need to compensate for that. I think sometimes in the general public, we think that by capping non-economic damages that we've not awarded any damages. Right. And there were many millions of dollars in this case. Plus, I do dispute that somebody who's injured and survives is a very different situation from somebody who is injured and passes away. Yeah. And that's why the Constitution says there can be no limit on non-economic damages for wrongful death. Wow. So it's a thorny issue, and we're going to continue to chip away at it.
Yeah, but every time we make progress, the court chips away at it a little bit. Justice Wyrick, who just went to the federal bench, wrote a dissenting opinion in an earlier case this year where he brilliantly laid out how they've been chipping away at it one point at a time. And not just chipping away at it because of some constitutional grounds, but because of a policy difference. And Justice Winchester, Justice Taylor, Justice Wyrick have noticed that over the past, but the court continues to do it, and it's thwarting the will of the people.
That's interesting.
I want to make one other point on this, is that this is tied to the economy of the state of Oklahoma because business needs consistency. Workplace safety is very, very important, and it's become more so with each passing day. So the reason we did the tort reform and the workers' comp reform was to try to make sure that no matter what jurisdiction you were in, if you had an injury similar to someone else, you're going to be treated the same. And so there's not going to be an advantage to go venue shopping or judge shopping. And that gives consistency to the injured party, but also to the employer. Right. And the employer absorbs all this financial responsibility, and ultimately that is passed on to customers and consumers, and it can be a deterrent to people wanting to locate their companies and businesses in our state. And we want to be a top 10 state, and you do that by having a top 10 economy.
Right.
So all these things are connected in some way, and that's why it's such a critical issue.
Economic development is a critical component, but I want to thread something together because she pointed it out earlier. So is making sure that the injured person is fairly compensated, and that's taken care of. And the system that we created through our reform balances those two. On the workers' comp side, this was a tort case that we're talking about that was most recent in front of the Supreme Court, but the workers' comp, we wanted to balance the needs of the injured worker, but get them back to work as quick as possible. And we've made huge strides in that arena.
Absolutely.
On the tort reform side, you want to make sure that you don't have the venue shopping that she's talking about. And venue shopping, for those who are not familiar with it, is you just go county to county to see which judge is going to be the most favorable to awarding huge claims.
Gotcha.
And then, but we've always got to keep in mind, and we're committed to making sure the injured party is justly taken care of.
Right.
And all of our reform has done that. The other side of this, which it was ingrained for 100 years, is fighting back and they'll continue to fight back for a long time.
And it's workers' comp, not touching on this particular decision, because again, this gentleman was disabled for life by his injury. But some of the things about workers' comp reform that is helpful to the injured party is that you want people to get back to work quickly.
Absolutely.
If you have something within the judicial system and the advocacy system and you string it out, you may have someone who becomes less able to go back to the job they were doing before. They become more limited. So the idea is get them well, make all those payments, get them back on the job so they can support their family, and I think have a better quality of life.
Absolutely. Well, guys, we're about out of time.
The bell's ringing.
Yeah, we hear the bell ringing on the floor. We're actually filming this right before the deadline week, the last day of deadline week. So we'll let you guys get back out on the floor. But thank you so much for just taking the time to explain this topic to us. Senator Daniels, I hope we can have you on again just to kind of dive more into your background and really talk about some of the legislation you've been running this year, because as Pro Tem, you mentioned this is an ongoing thing, the tort reform and workers' comp reform.
Criminal justice reform that we just barely just mentioned.
Yes.
So we need to talk about that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us this week and walking us through that. And hopefully we can have you on again here soon in a few weeks.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Pro Tim, anything last to add?
I'm going to continue to practice my intro to see if I can get as good as you.
He needs one more week of practice.
I need another week in front of the mirror trying to get prepared for the way you do it. But I appreciate it. We do need to run to the floor.
Love it. Absolutely. Guys, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next week. Bye.